first element I was going to call for is that Kirby, CEO. As he went to church this weekend, reporters tried to get the president to comment on all of this, but he did not respond. And these objects, as were being described, the first five balloons was flying 1,000 and it had the ability to maneuver on its own. Officials said there was no reason they fled across the U.S., which would have so as not to endanger our people below. These other objects were flying under that threshold, so they were shot down, which lawmakers now say causes more policy questions, like if something's flying over 60,000 feet, could it pass, automatically shoot it out of the sky, below 60,000 feet, what's the threshold, and why are these decisions the way we are? Officials have said that there is no information right now that these objects that they have not seen. Also, we're asked if we rule out aliens or extraterrestrials, and we said that they didn't rule anything out. So I'm sure there's a reason for all of that. Why they are able to say no surveillance, they're not able to just rule out aliens, on the front end. So we're looking forward to all of the answers that we will get today. No, okay, thank you.
On you. Yeah, I mean, okay. Oh, you were. Yeah. People like people stuff. Yeah, I mean, I think it was at the very yeah, at the very beginning with his right, the guy. It almost doesn't. I would have preferred them not to call it. Simply to see it first, but then again to go.
No, no, thank you. It was impressive.
Attention, the press briefing will begin in 2 minutes. The press briefing will begin in 2 minutes. Thank you.
Oh, she got back there.
bless you, and good afternoon. Okay, just have one thing at the top to get us started. President Biden is prepared to provide any and all types of aid to the people of Turkey and Syria in response to the ongoing humanitarian crisis there, and we continue to take steps to do so. I'm sure you all saw during the Super Bowl yesterday to donate to earthquake relief efforts, and I want to point out some resources just for that. There's a page on USAID's has a list where they have a list of vetted organizations responding to this crisis should individuals want to contribute. You can find that at CID.org. In Turkey, our urban search and rescue teams continue their efforts assisting in live rescues over the weekend. We also continue to support the Turkish teams on the ground. U.S. military helicopters are providing critical lift for U.S. and international responders. Our teams also continue to conduct structural damage assessments of buildings with the hope of being able to clear as many as possible. They have assessed more than 1,500 buildings, allowing thousands of people who are currently displaced to be able to return home. In Syria, cross-border aid shipments have increased. Yesterday, a fourth humanitarian, medical, food, and other aid. And one last thing before I turn it over to the Admiral, I just want to make sure we address this from the White House. I know there have been questions and concerns about this, but there is no indication of aliens or extraterrestrial activity with these recent takedowns. Again, there is no indication of aliens or terrestrial activity with these recent takedowns. Wanted to make sure that people knew that, all of you knew that, and it was important for us to say that from here because we've been hearing a lot about it. I'm not. I'm just, I love E.T., the movie, but I'm just going to leave it. With that, with all seriousness, I know there's a lot of questions about the Admiral John Kirby is here with us today, and he's going to have a couple things to say at the top about it, and take your questions. Okay?
Thanks for clearing that up. It makes my job easier. I do have quite a few comments here at the top, so I do hope that you'll just bear with me and then be happy to take whatever questions you might have. So, today, our effort to cover the debris of several objects that the United States Air Force shot down days, as well as that of the spy balloon belonging to the People's Republic of China. And I'd like to put into some context for you how we have worked and are still working to understand the issue of high-altitude, low-speed craft. Now, let me start with the Chinese program. When President Biden came into office, he directed the U.S. intelligence community to do a broad intelligence to ensure that we were working to detect and to protect against them. I think for reasons that you will all understand, we go into many details about how intelligence efforts, because much of what we've done and are doing is, of course, sensitive. But we were able to determine that China has a high-altitude balloon program that the People's Liberation Army. It was operating during the previous administration, but they did not detect it. We detected it. We tracked it. And we have been carefully studying it as much as we can. We know that these PRC surveillance balloons have crossed over dozens of countries on multiple continents around the world, including some of our closest allies and partners. We assessed that at this time, balloons have provided limited additive capabilities to the PRC's other intelligence platforms used over the United States. But in the future, if the PRC continues to advance this technology, it certainly could become valuable to them. The President also instructed the intelligence community to take a broad look at the phenomenon of unidentified aerial objects. Indeed, President Biden conducted the first daily intelligence briefing session back in June of 2021. He was briefed that this is not just an issue for the United States, but one for the rest of the world. As I said, our friends and partners are with this as well. We worked on a bipartisan basis to stand up an office at the Pentagon to stop this. in partnership with the intelligence community, academic institutions, and the private sector. These unidentified aerial phenomena have been reported for many years without explanation or deep examination by the government. President Biden has changed all that. We're finally trying to understand better. Now, in light of the Chinese balloon program and the recent incursion into our airspace, the United States and Canada, through NORAD, have been more closely scrutinizing that airspace, including enhancing our radar capabilities, which, as the commander of NORAD and NORAD, General Van Hook, said just last night, may at least partially explain the increase in the objects that have been detected. Slow-moving objects at high altitude with a small radar cross-section are difficult to detect on radar. Even objects the size of a Chinese bomb, which had a payload the size of roughly 3 school buses, were not picked up by previous administrations or other countries. We also know that a range of entities, including countries, companies, research, and academic organizations, operate objects at these altitudes for purposes that are not nefarious at all, including scientific research. That said, because we have not yet been able to definitively assess what these most recent objects are, we acted out of an abundance of caution to protect the security, our interest, and flight safety. Saturday, we acted in consultation with the Canadian government, the President speaking personally with Prime Minister Trudeau. The spy balloon was, of course, different because we knew where that was. As we have said, we do not assess that these are direct to people on the ground, and we are laser focused on confirming their nature and purpose, including through intensive efforts to collect debris in the remote locations where they have fallen. In each instance, we have followed the same basic course. We assessed whether they posed any kinetic threat to people on the ground. They did not. We assessed whether they were sending any communication signals. We detected none. We looked to see whether they were maneuvering or had any propulsion capability. We saw no signs of that. And we made sure to determine whether or not they were manned. They were not. We did, however, assess that their altitudes were considerably lower than the Chinese high-altitude balloon and posed civilian commercial air traffic. And while we have no specific reason to suspect that they were conducting surveillance of any kind, we couldn't rule that out. That is why the President, at the recommendation of the Secretary of Defense, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and the NORTHCOM NORAD commander, gave the order to shoot them down. These missions were completed successfully and safely. Efforts are actively underway right now at all sites to find what is left of those objects so that we can better understand and communicate with the American people what they are. I think it's important to remind the objects in Alaska and Canada are in pretty remote terrain, ice and wilderness, all of that making it difficult to find them in winter weather. The object over Lake Huron now lies in what is probably very deep water. So outside of recovery operations, what are we doing? Well, we are continuing to monitor. There are no active tracks today. Continue to do their important work. Secondly, we are consulting with allies and partners on the challenge of identified aerial phenomenon, how we can all work together to deal with that challenge. The President has directed the Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, and the Director of National Intelligence to engage with their relevant counterparts to share information and to try to gain their perspectives as well. Again, this is an issue that affects everybody around the world. Third, we will continue to engage members of Congress on what we are doing and what we learn. The President has made this a very top priority. We have, over the course of just the last few days, and certainly the course of last week, reached out to inform and Congress of the actions that we are conducting and of the recovery operations that are underway. We've also kept Congress briefed generally on this issue of Chinese surveillance balloons, including classified briefings last August. And last week, administration officials provided classified briefings for all senators and all members of the House of Representatives on the PRC surveillance balloon. We fully expect and anticipate and support the ability to continue these briefings in the days ahead. And fourth, the President through his national security advisor, has today an agency team to study the broader policy implications for detection, analysis, and disposition of unidentified aerial objects that pose either safety or security risks. Every element of the government works to mitigate these events.
John, if the objects don't pose a military threat and they don't pose a threat to anybody on the ground, why shoot them down? Particularly because the military is routinely monitoring radar blips.
I kind of covered that in the opening statement. Two real reasons. First, there was a very real potential risk to civilian air traffic. The one shot down on yesterday, was about 20,000 feet, and the two shot down Friday and Saturday were at about 40,000 feet. And as you know, transcontinental air traffic is roughly around 30,000 feet on weather. And so, because we assessed that they weren't manned and weren't being controlled, therefore left to atmospheric conditions, the real risk to safety of flight was a problem. The second purpose, I talked about this earlier too, was even though we had no indications that any of these three objects were surveilling, we couldn't rule that out. And so you want to err on the side of safety interest, and the fact that these objects could have and likely did at some point in their path transit over military sites or sensitive sites. So again, out of an abundance of caution for those two reasons, the president, recommendation of his military leaders, directed them to be taken down.
Because it's so unprecedented, should the public be hearing from the president directly on this?
We have been, I think, as transparent as we can. I won't speak for the president's personal speaking schedule, but I mean, he has been deeply engaged in every one of these decisions. He's been kept informed, including as of this morning, on what's going on with recovery efforts, and he's very much staying on top of the issue and directing his team to make sure we are properly consulting and briefing not just members of Congress but state leaders as well. And of course, we're also doing what we can in the public.
Wait a second, sir. Thank you, John.
What is the president's standard going to be going forward about when he orders an unidentified object shot down?
It comes down to formulation, and that's if at the recommendation of his military leaders he believes that the safety and security of the United States, the safety and security of the American people, his prime responsibility, warrant that kind of a decision.
So it's possible we could see the basis.
I don't think it's useful for me to get ahead of where we are right now. The president will always side on preserving and protecting the safety and security of the American people.
You said we're not flying any surveillance balloons over China. Are we flying any other kind of surveillance over China?
We're not flying surveillance balloons over China. I'm not aware of any other craft that we're flying over into Chinese airspace.
And then finally, can you tell us anything more about this octagonal object? How big was it?
That was. I'm not going to get into a description. I've seen the press reports about what it looked like. I think we all need to be humble here in what our ability is to positively identify stuff from fighter aircraft that are going several hundred miles an hour past, essentially, in terms of relative motion, a stationary object. So we don't know what this exactly looked like, and again, we're still not sure exactly what the purpose of it was or who owned it, but we hope to be able to find out more once we can recover the debris from that one and from the other two as well.
Just a few minutes ago, Prime Minister Trudeau said that there's some sort of pattern over the last few days. Is that something you can elaborate on, what sort of pattern the White House has seen? I'm
not familiar with the Prime Minister's comments, so I don't know if I swing at that. I would just tell you that going back to these objects are not, they did not appear to have any self-propulsion. So the likely hypothesis is that there were prevailing winds, and perhaps that's what the Prime Minister is talking about. I don't want to speak for him, but certainly as the prevailing winds, particularly at that altitude, go west to east across the North American airspace, I mean, there was a general common movement in that regard.
You spoke at the top about kind of reassessing radar given what happened with the initial balloon. Can you give us a sense, can we expect, should we assume that this is the regular number of these objects over the United States, that they've always been there and they haven't been looked at the same way, or is there any reason to expect that this is more than usual that are flying over?
So two thoughts there. I mean, I think I think we can all get our heads around the fact that that sometimes things floating at high altitudes for various purposes, as I said, scientific research, weather balloons, all manner of innocuous craft can be aloft at high altitudes. I don't think that that's necessarily unusual here. It's difficult for me to know exactly what you can expect going forward. One of the reasons that we think we're seeing more is because we're looking for more. As you heard General Van Herk mention last night, they have modified the filters and the gains, as we call it, of the radar capabilities to look more discreetly at high altitude, small radar cross section, low speed objects. And so if you do that, anybody that's operated a radar will know you can set the parameters, and if you set the parameters in such a way that to look for a certain something, it's more likely that you're going to find a certain something.
Given all you've discussed here and the actions the administration is taking and what people have learned, Chinese spy balloon this year and previous years, these unidentified objects that we shoot down, they might have a question. When it comes to these higher altitudes, are America's borders secure?
The President takes, as I said earlier, he takes our national security extremely seriously. He has no higher responsibility than the safety and security of the American people. And I don't think you need to look any further, frankly, than the decisions he's made in just the last week to 10 days to evidence that.
But it feels like he's plugging holes, like these are vulnerabilities that we are discovering in real time.
You're making an assumption there that I don't know that the analysis will actually.
The President gave the yesterday. Where was he? What kind of information did he have when he gave that order? What was briefed to him? And how did
he was here in the White House. He was kept constantly informed by his national security team and certainly by the military. He made that decision. I couldn't give you the exact time on the clock, but it was I believe mid to late morning, and then it was executed in the afternoon.
Foreign government in reaction to shooting that object down? Was
The
the
one
President
the one
anticipating
yesterday?
the one yesterday? Yeah.
Well, it was shot over. I mean, it was shot over Lake Huron and landed in what we believe to be the Canadian side of the lake. So we were obviously in constant communication and consultation with our Canadian counterparts, and they are rightly, because of where we think it splashed down. I mean, they're sort of in concert with the U.S. Coast Guard, but they are all trying to locate right now. But there was good communication with our Canadian allies.
Signs of a foreign government taking a special interest in that object from yesterday?
No.
Or reacting in an unusual way?
No.
Good. SV in the back.
Thanks. Two questions. The China balloon giving limited additive capabilities. I assume you're meaning onto their satellite surveillance. Can you specify what exactly is from a balloon that they're not getting from orbiting satellites that go over us like dozens of times?
With the caveat that we haven't fully recovered everything, though we have recovered some things from the bottom of the Atlantic, and we're analyzing that. But we don't know exactly what this balloon was surveilling or what its capabilities were. So just in general, and that is an important caveat that I'd like you to remember. When you are at a lower altitude than space, you could perhaps get a better fidelity. of imagery, for instance, of things on the ground. When you are not moving at the speed of a satellite, and therefore, only getting seconds over, when you can maneuver left, right, slow down, speed up, like this thing could, then you can loiter. If you can loiter, you can soak in a little bit more. You can spend more time over a sensitive site.
Some of the satellites, I mean, they're just there gathering signals intelligence, right? So what is the benefit? I mean, is it just to see what kind of fidelity?
We're going to learn more. I'd rather not go into any more detail than that right now. We're going to learn more. And frankly, I think that's a terrific question you should be asking.
And one last one. You said that the other objects shot down were not able to transmit, or were not transmitting, did not have any propulsion. Did the China balloon, did that have any emitting signals back?
I'm not going to go into more detail about the capabilities of that. We are going to be studying it and analyzing. There is no question in our minds that that system was designed to surveil, that was an intelligence asset. I'll leave it there.
Has there been any outreach from anywhere in the administration to the kinds of companies that produce weather balloons or other craft that would fit these descriptions that might be from the commercial or corporate world to say, is this yours? Or have you been hearing from anyone who might say, we have ours, they're in this area? Is that going on now?
I don't know of any conversations right now, but one of the reasons why the president directed Mr. Sullivan to put together an agency effort is to take a long look at that and try to learn a little bit better about who is up at that altitude doing what for completely legitimate purposes. I think we all recognize we need to probably have a better sight picture on that. Once it's an agency effort to look.
And what kind of intelligence might be happening in terms of the diplomacy that's going on or whatever, if these are state-owned objects?
I'm not sure I understand what you mean.
Is there network conversations that might be happening where someone might be able to say, based on this octagonal description, that, hey, that sounds like the so-and-so? I mean, is there some conversations that are happening that might be able to give us some descriptions?
I mean, the short answer to your question is yes, and I talked about that in my opening statement. The president also directed Secretary Blinken, Secretary Austin, Dr. Haynes, to have conversations around the world to share with them what we're learning, but also to get their perspectives.
The Chinese were quick to say it's ours, but it was for commercial purposes.
Yeah, again, we're going to have those kinds of conversations with our we can learn from them what perhaps they can learn from us.
And are we still with object, or can we call them balloons?
Still with object.
And just to follow up on Kelly's question,
And I won't mess that up today.
On the corporate angle, is there any is going to affect the executive order on surveilling the U.S. companies and what they're doing in China and their
I know of no
operations
such
there?
change to that executive order.
Okay, and then is there, and just, you said a moment ago that there's no knowledge of a U.S. Just the fact that China has a different definition of what their territory is than the United States. Is there any U.S. surveillance aircraft over Taiwan, over the South China Sea that would fit into that?
There is no U.S. surveillance Chinese airspace.
Okay, even Chinese claimed airspace.
There is no U.S. surveillance aircraft in Chinese airspace.
Okay, and then just finally, is there any new as far as on that basis going?
Well, again, that's exactly what the president wants Mr. Sullivan to run as a process, an interagency process, to help us, as I said in my opening statement, get around the policy implications here, and whether or not there needs to be any policy changes going forward.
Thanks, John. There's no precedent for U.S. fighters taking down objects over U.S. territory, as far as I'm aware of. My question is, you talked about the tweak in radar systems.
Yeah.
Has there been a tweak in the threshold for the Pentagon presenting to the president signing off on military action related to anything over our airspace.
I'm not sure I'm following what you
In the
mean.
wake of the Chinese spy balloon,
Yeah.
the radars were tweaked, which is why you think you're seeing some of these things.
Right.
Has the decision about the threshold for the use of fighters to take down objects also been tweaked? Has it been lowered? Has it been changed? We've never seen this before. All of a sudden, we've seen
No,
three
actually,
days.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand it at first. No, I mean, and you heard General Van Herk talk about this last night. He's using established protocols to engage craft in the air, aircraft in the air, that can be legitimately brought down. And as he said last night, the best way to do that, certainly in a timely and efficient, effective way, was through fighter aircraft and through the Sidewinder air-to-air missiles. Looked at, and he talked about it. They looked at other options to try to bring them down, to include gunfire, but that would have presented a greater risk to the pilots themselves. So this was the safest, most effective way to do that. Now, where we go from here, I think we just don't know right now in terms of whether there needs to be threshold changes, as you put out. I think it's important to just take a step back here and remember what the president did was ordered these acts with the safety and security of the American people. And there were very good reasons to do it. The military then, once given an order, determines how they're going to execute that order. General Van Herk decided the best way to do this was with Sidewinder missiles and fighter aircraft.
And just to quickly put a sharper point on it, this isn't reactive to spy balloon in the sense of there was political pressure, and so we are going to act quickly to take down any objects over our airspace because of the pressure that came from the Republic.
These were decisions purely on what was in the interest of the American people.
Thanks, Karine. Thanks, John. John, does the U.S. government have video or imagery of these latest intercepts, and will you guys be releasing it?
You'd have to talk to DOD about that, Jackie. I don't know what kind of information would exist, and they'd be the one to talk about whether they're releasable or not. Obviously, certainly with respect to the spy balloon, we want to make sure that we are gleaning imagery. We can answer the question better. And so, to what degree there is or will or will not be public release, I do want to stress that we're going to want to make sure that we have had a chance to analyze the image for ourselves.
Following up on Phil's question, I mean, I guess what we're trying to discern is, you said earlier, we're looking for these more, so we're finding more, and so
I said that could be one reason why we're looking more.
but we're getting, why are we, and to add to that, the NORAD commander, for instance, said that when the first spy balloon was crossing over American and Canadian airspace, one of the reasons that he couldn't take action was because his assessment was that it didn't pose a military threat or have hostile intent, and so he couldn't take action there. It seems like maybe that protocol has changed, or his ability to make that call where there is not an imminent threat militarily or physically might have changed. So to us, what changed? Why are we shooting them down all the time?
I kind of feel like I took care of that in my opening statement, but I'm happy to revisit it. I mean, really two reasons here. And these are certainly in both cases. I think we need to separate the Chinese spy balloon. We knew what it was. We knew where it was going. We knew what it was trying to do. And by not taking it down, it was also a huge payload. Like I said, so really the option of shooting that down over land wasn't a legitimate option, because somebody really could have gotten hurt. And we used the time available to us, knowing what this thing was all about. We used that time to study it, to learn from it, to collect on it, and taking it down at the earliest opportunity in the water. And we have retrieved some of that debris off the bottom, and we're studying that. Hang on a second, I'll be right there. So let's separate that from these other three. And these other three, what are some of the differences? Let me get through this, and then altitude's different. The Chinese spy balloon was at 60,000 plus, well outside commercial air traffic concerns. These three were right Chinese spy balloon knew exactly what that thing was, and we knew what it was trying to do. And we saw it, Jackie, as it slowed down, sped up, maneuvered a little bit, trying to get a look at what we believe to be sensitive military. These other three, they didn't have propulsion, they weren't being maneuvered, it was basically they were being driven by the wind. We don't know for sure whether can't rule it. So there was an uncertainty there that, again, out of an abundance of caution, doing the prudent thing, the president directed that they get taken down. And I get where you're going. Is this the standard going forward? And we're gonna dive into this. We're gonna learn from the events. We're gonna continue to study what happened. We're gonna have an interagency effort that helps us get around the policy implications here. Where they go. Bottom line, for the president is we got to do the right thing for the American people, for our safety and security.
It's strange that no one's claimed these yet.
I can't say whether that's strange or not, since we're sort of in uncharted territory here, no pun intended. But we don't know, and I suspect that go ahead. I'm basically done.
Okay.
I'm basically done.
Sir, what's your name, sir?
Bo from CBS.
Okay.
Has the payload recovered in South Carolina? The large so-called payload that's...
Yeah, as I said, some of the debris, certainly they were able to take things off the surface like the next day, actually that afternoon, some of the balloon fabric. In the days since, they have been able to recover some, not all, of the payload that sank to the bottom of the Atlantic. It's about 45 feet of water. Weather conditions are pretty tough off the coast right now, like they to get water on. In the course of the weekend, they were able to raise some of the debris, including some of the electronics and some of the structure.
Do you have an expectation of when all that payload is going to be collected?
I don't. I wish if I could tell you that, I'd be a very wealthy man. I mean, it could take a long time. The sea state conditions and the degree to which we have to protect the safety of the divers.
And one last question. You said you were unsure of the surveillance capabilities of these latest objects. Last week we were told sometimes that every precaution was taken to ensure that the sensitive installations were covered. We don't know exactly what you all did, but has there been a
Nor are you going to find out.
Has there been a posture change nationwide regarding all of these sensitive proactively?
If you're, let me just put a fork in this. If the implication is that there's some sort of now security policy for every base on the continental United States, the answer is no. We do have protocols, particularly when we know that surveillance is going to occur, like in the Open Skies Treaty with Russia, for instance, when all that's scheduled and laid out, and when you know that there's going to be an open skies flight by Russia, you take the appropriate steps, and that's what we did in the case of the Chinese spy balloon, and we'll always do that. I will never talk about what precautions we're going to make at any given base at any given time, but we always do what we need to do to protect our nation's secrets.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.
No.
Iraq's?
Right there.
Okay. Admiral, you started the briefing by talking about the president's involvement in this. The report from ODNI recently that goes over this says there were 247 unidentified aerial phenomenon reports since March of 2021, some of which have, quote, demonstrated unusual flight characteristics or performance capabilities. So can you say why the president recently, in the last couple of weeks, ordered some of the objects to be shot down, and why there weren't any orders throughout 2021 or throughout 2022?
It's very simple. It comes down to what sort of safety and security threats and risks we're talking about, and also it comes down to a lot to our ability to track, detect, and engage. Having come from the Pentagon, I can tell you that some of these UAVs, while we may not be able to know what each and every one is doing, some of the big concern there was that many of those reports were happening around our training ranges. were happening around air training ranges. So combat pilots were seeing these things, and it was an initial impact to the safety of flight of our pilots. But you may not have but a fleeting moment on some of these things to see it. And so it's different. In these cases, we had time to detect, time to analyze, time to engage, time to make those kinds of decisions. But it all comes down to safety and security, first and foremost.
So is the time, though, is a matter of capability? You have better capabilities now?
We are certainly improving capabilities now, and as I said, the President has directed the National Security Team to dig into this deeper from an interagency effort and to see what, if other improvements we need to make. I mean, just by adapting the way the radar parameters are set, we've improved our ability to detect. And again, I said that could be one reason why we're seeing more.
Thank you so much. So you said that the debris fell on frozen water in remote areas. These are also usually down by sun. So how optimistic are you that you will be able to collect enough debris to really get an idea of what these objects were?
Until we get how much damage was not just by the missile strike, but by the fall from a very high altitude, and as you said, in one case on sea ice. So we'll just have to see.
Yeah, thank you, John. Does Secretary of State Blinken plan to meet with his Chinese counterpart this week at the Munich Security?
I'm referring to for the Secretary's schedule. I don't have visibility on that.
Okay, and have you been able to? What have you been able to learn? Not you, but the government, since these objects were shot down. I mean, you just alluded to the fact that you get on site. I mean, has there been any additional information since one was shot down Friday and then over the weekend?
Because these are just happened over the last few days and we haven't found the debris, there's still a lot more we expect to be able to learn. And I think once we can get to the debris, and I'm not forecasting how easy that's going to be. They all three have fallen into some pretty remote, difficult areas to reach. But we're going to do everything we can to find them, and that will tell us a lot. Since I know you didn't ask about this, but in the case of the Chinese spy balloon, we have been able to recover some debris and some of the electronics and even some of the structure from the bottom of the Atlantic, and that will also tell us a lot. And we are we're learning from it right now.
No, we gotta get everybody. No, everybody. Guys,
when do you think that you'll have all the debris, or as much debris as you can get from all the sites?
I'm sorry, when do we think
when do you think you'll be satisfied that you've gotten as much debris as you can from all the sites?
I wish I could give you a date certain on the calendar. I can't do that. We're working to surveil them right now. In fact, there's an AVP-3 that's flying over the site in Alaska. The Canadians are in charge, obviously, of the one in the Yukon, and now the Coast Guard is in the Lake Huron working with the Canadian Coast Guard to do the same thing there. So we're working this as hard as we can, and we will keep you informed as we learn more. As I'm doing today, divers in the water over the weekend. We have recovered debris off the coast of South Carolina. We'll keep you informed.
Will you brief Congress this week?
There have been briefings as early as late last week, and we do fully expect that there will be additional briefings this week, perhaps even later today.
We're running out of time.
Objects were not theirs. How do you respond to that? Has the White House had conversations with Beijing about this, and can you share a little bit about that?
We know the first one was Chinese. They admitted it. They claimed it was a weather balloon. We know it's not. These three, we don't have attribution for right now. We don't know who owns them. So I'm not going to take anybody's word at face value here until we can take a look at them. We have an embassy in Beijing. We maintain routine diplomatic conversations, and we have had over that spy balloon incident, we did have private discussions with senior Chinese.
Thank you, Ron. I know you just said that. Are you in touch with the Chinese? Is there any effort to arrange a call with President Xi at all?
I'm not aware of any plans for that.
If I could just ask a question on Israel, does the president plan to speak with PM Netanyahu about the moves his government is making to try to weaken the Israel judiciary?
I have no calls or conversations to read out. We are deeply concerned by with respect to settlements.
Flying over U.S.
As the
Moldovan president just recently has said that there was a Russian plot to sort of overthrow her government and break Moldova's path to Europe. It was something Zelensky himself had also warned about. What is the U.S.'s assessment of this possible plot, and more broadly, what is the concern about Russia's attempts to sort of influence the pro-European governments in the region, even though it's right now focused on Ukraine, about other countries in the region?
So, what I'll say about that is deeply concerning reports, certainly not outside the bounds of Russian behavior. And we absolutely stand with the Moldovan government and the Moldovan people.
But you have no confirmation from the U.S. side of intel?
I know of no independent confirmation, but we're certainly not questioning the capacity, the will of the Russians and Mr. Putin to try to do that. It's perfectly right.
Yes, I was going to ask you a question. Just one quick question. Have you established whether these are lighter than air or heavier than air?
We have not.
Okay, but we have to get to everyone, okay? You already had a question. Go ahead.
All three shootdowns in the U.S. occurred offshore, but the one in Canada occurred over land. So is it effective U.S. policy to not shoot down objects over land for safety concerns?
Is this some kind of policy decision? We will always, in deciding whether something should be taken down, consider the impact on the ground.
When the Chinese balloon came down, the ministry indicated they would respond in the way that they were prepared to. If it turns out that the other objects are also Chinese in origin, is there a menu of options prepared to the president for how we would react?
Terrific hypothetical. We're just not there yet.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so one issue. The Chinese spy issue. You've got buying oil from Russia. You got China, opening up cases in the U.S. trying to steal U.S. technology from universities. President Xi is going to meet at the point to review a big review of the U.S. relationship with China. At what point does the president ask for it from President Xi?
Again, I don't have a call to talk about today. Let me just, again, level set here, and I know I'm running close on time, but the president met with President Xi at Bali at the G20. The whole purpose of that discussion was to move this relationship forward in a better way. Most consequential bilateral relationship in the world, the president knows that, and he wants to move the relationship forward in a better way. And Secretary Blinken was dang near wheels up, trying to head to Beijing to have those kinds of conversations, to get some of these communication vehicles and venues back on track, whether it's climate change or military to military. We were willing to do that. We were looking forward to doing that. And the Chinese decided to fly a surveillance balloon over the continental United States, and it wouldn't be inappropriate to have that. When are those discussions going to get back on the calendar? I couldn't tell you. As Secretary Blinken has said, it'll happen at the appropriate time. Now is not that time. It doesn't mean, and people shouldn't take away from this, that all communication has been severed between the United States and China, that Beijing and Washington aren't talking. We still have an embassy there. We still have an ability through Secretary Blinken's office to communicate with senior leaders. Fortunately, it's very interesting talking to Secretary of Defense Austin, but there are still ways to communicate. And the president would tell you that now's exactly the time. Some of the lines of communication so we can avoid miscalculation.
Has it set back the relationship?
What's that?
Has this list of things set back the relationship?
It has certainly not helped us move forward in the way that we wanted to move.
All right, last question in the back. No, sir. No, sir. No. Right here.
James, okay. Me? Oh, thank you. Last Friday, you answered my question about President Biden's message during his trip to Poland. But I'm wondering why he specifically chosen Poland this trip, since so many countries are helping Ukraine, and he visited Poland 11 months ago.
The president's really looking forward to this trip. Certainly, many of you that it's timed around, sadly, is going to be a year of war in Ukraine. Poland has been a strident, a tremendous supporter of Ukraine, and a generous host, not only to American troops, but millions of Ukrainian refugees who have fled there in safety. The Poles are, pardon the pun, but they're punching well above their weight, and we very much appreciate all the support. The President wants to thank President Duda in person. He wants to thank the Polish people in person. Make broader points about how it's important for the kind of courage and unity we're seeing in Poland from NATO allies, sadly into what will be a second year of war.
Okay, thank you very much. Karine, and thank you for questions. One on unexplained aerial phenomena. The second will be the Russia-Ukraine war. My understanding is that the top officials at the Pentagon, when asked explicitly if they were ruling out any kind of extraterrestrial presence, said they weren't ruling anything out. Yet at the beginning of today's briefing, albeit with her usual smile, Ms. Jean-Pierre without any extraterrestrial activity.
People need to worry about aliens with respect to these craft. Period. I don't think there's any more that needs to be said there.
On the Russia-Ukraine war, as we approach the anniversary, in the days immediately after the commencement of the conflict, we heard from senior U.S. officials such as the CIA director in congressional testimony that President Putin had been observed by U.S. officials to have consumed his decision-making and these to play happened on the battlefield. As we approach this year anniversary, what do we observe about President Putin's decision-making now, decision-making, his grip in his country? Has that changed over the course of the year?
I can't speak to the way Mr. Putin gets advised and how he, who got him and what they're saying. I couldn't begin to get inside Kremlin decision-making processes. Clearly, Mr. Putin is not making good decisions. Shouldn't have invaded in the first place. There was no threat to anybody, let alone Russia. Clearly, he hasn't made sound decisions, nor has his military with respect to their performance on the battlefield. They're some of the same problems they were a year ago. Logistics, sustainment, integration of joint fires, manpower personnel, unit cohesion, on and on. The military is still struggling. They not these problems, and it's borne out by the fact that he continues to change generals the way I change socks. So I mean, he's still struggling.
Sorry, I have to end the briefing. I got to go to the Oval, but I will see you tomorrow. And thank you for the compliment on the smile. I appreciate that. But I'll be back tomorrow. Thanks, everybody. Have a great one.